Welcome back to today's episode of Words of the Wise. I have Chief Livengood from Pioneer PD. This is his 38th year in law enforcement. Really looking forward to having this conversation. Welcome to the show, Chief Livengood. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's both an honor, I think, and a privilege to be able to address a lot of these topics that sometimes I think get overlooked. But I'm excited for the program.
I'm looking forward to it too. And, when we talked offline, it was really apparent how much you care and how passionate you are about the topic of leadership and wellness. So I'm excited to share that with our listeners. Give us a little bit of background into you. Who are you? How did you get started 38 years ago? What does your career look like so far?
Sure, sure. I think just like a lot of law enforcement officers that are out there. Um, Early on, I really didn't know exactly what it was that I wanted to do, but back in the early to mid, I would say mid to late 70s, my father went through the police academy. And he spent 30 plus years as a reserve in the community that I grew up in Bryan, Ohio. And so it just kind of seemed like maybe that was a direction or a route that I wanted to go. So I kind of got one over on him, and I was trying to decide what I wanted to do. And my father wanted me to go to college, and I wasn't so sure that I was the college kind of person. And so I talked with an Army recruiter. My mother helped me to sign on the line there. Um, much to much to my father's disliking, but now I think that he's just so proud of the things that we've been able to do. So I started my law enforcement career back in 1987 when I went into the United States Army's Military Police Corps, and I had the opportunity to travel the world and just perform law enforcement functions in a military community, much like we do here in the civilian capacity as well. So later on, I went into the United States Army Reserve. And then I did a stint there for about 7, 8 years. And I decided to utilize my GI Bill, went through the police academy, and I've been involved in law enforcement since 1996 in the civilian capacity. So it's really been just a passion of mine to get involved in law enforcement, and so I'm still in it 38 years later, and it it has its ups and downs, but there's definitely been more ups than downs. So it's been an enjoyable career.
I love that. I always find it really funny. Every single person I talk to who's in law enforcement who has kids, they're like, no, I don't want them to do that. And it's almost like there has to be like a reverse psychology thing that goes on. If your dad was like, yep, do it, maybe you would have gone and done something else and gone to college, or maybe not. But we find, a lot of people are second generation and, want to follow in the footsteps of their family members who, were also involved in this profession. So I think that it's really cool to see people who strive to be like that, to strive to be like their parents.
I think it sets up a culture with your kids when your parents do something and they set a good example. I think it's great. My son's currently serves in the United States Army now,
Yeah.
stationed overseas, and my youngest right now is very interested in looking at the military or law enforcement. So you just try to help them establish those goals and let them know, make them attainable goals, and then go after them.
Yeah. I also think that there's so much power and value in mentorship, regardless of what the relationship is. Your kids growing up and having a positive influence and someone who is there to set the example and to mentor them through life in the decisions that they make with their career moving forward. And I think that sometimes we forget that people are looking for people to set that example. They're looking for those positive influences. And we all have, I think, the ability to do that. You don't have to be, in a parent capacity. I think every person who's listening to this podcast, we all have the ability to set an example for the younger people who are looking for that and craving that type of mentorship and, positive reinforcement in their lives.
Absolutely. And I think that's where, even where we are, I've not been fortunate to work into a huge community, but in the small communities that I've worked in, I have the ability to strive to make a difference in young adults. Um, give them options. Some of those kids that may be troubled, let them know that you can break the chain and you can be who you want to be. You can set some goals. What is it that you really want to do in life? And then tell them go after it. And it's strange enough that I've had officers that worked for me for years ago, and later on their children came to work for me later. So it comes full circle.
Yeah, it's inspiring, like I came from a childhood where I felt like I didn't have that. I didn't have someone showing me that I could choose a different life for myself. And a lot of times when you're in those environments and you grow up in an environment of adversity, that's all you know.
Sure.
If you don't have someone else who is showing you, I'm going to say like quote unquote, like the light, a different
Sure.
path, you don't even know that that's an option, and I think, you could say what you want about social media now these days, but I actually think in some capacity, social media has been helpful to show people who are in those environments that there are other options. But when I grew up, we didn't have that, it was like we
Oh,
didn't have social media. Like you had the people who
oh,
were closest to you and that's all you knew. And so I really think that, it's almost our responsibility to show people that like you can be anything that you want. You don't have to end up like your parents. You don't have to be stuck in the environment that you're in now if you don't want to be. And so I really appreciate you saying that because I think that we get so inundated in the day-to-day grind, and so focused on ourselves that we forget that some of the work that we do can be inspiring for other people and help them to choose a different trajectory.
absolutely. I think in this profession, even in small communities, we're so blessed to. It's kind of a blessing and a curse. I get to know the people in the community, and the people get to know you. You know their business, and they know yours, and that can be a good and a bad thing. But we have the ability to. Uh, encourage the youth in the community, to encourage them to be what they want to be, and just go after their goals, go after their dreams, give them that guidance and direction to point them in the right direction. It isn't always about uh, charging, juveniles and sending them to to juvie. Sometimes it's training, educating them, and teaching them, to make good choices, and be the best version of themselves.
Yeah, and I think also just treating people like they're people. Um, when I was growing up, I remember everyone in my environment told me that I wasn't going to amount to anything. It was just this constant reinforcement that like I was just going to end up like my parents. And so like you start to believe those things, like when people are constantly putting you down, you start to believe it. And then sometimes all it takes is that one person to be like, "Hey kid, I believe in you. You know, you can do better." For them to start believing in themselves, and and this wasn't like a youth situation, but I was doing an on-site with another organization, and there was a gentleman in the lobby talking to a detective, and they were kind of going back and forth, and the gentleman left, and the detective came back in, and he's like, "That was someone who I used to arrest all the time." And he came back in and said now he's 5 years sober, and that I was a part of helping him to believe in himself to choose a different path. And he wanted to come thank me as a part of his program. And I was like, that is what it's all about, right? Because that person probably was not like, yeah, in 5 years, like this guy's going to come thank me. But he treated him with dignity and respect. And, I'm guessing had conversations with him saying, hey, man, like you can do better. You don't have to choose this life. Now, 5 years later, he's clean and sober, choosing a different life for himself, and he's coming back to thank him. And so, I think that like that's what it's about, helping to influence people's lives in a positive way.
Sure, sure. I think there's a lot of gratification in being able to see a difference, or make a difference in somebody's life. I handled a domestic many years ago, and this young lady, unfortunately, she was just in and out of bad relationships, and just taking a moment to stop and be an active listener, encouraging her, you deserve better and you can do better, and you just have to be able to see the signs, and sometimes we don't always do that.
Mhm.
20 years later she comes back and says, thank you.
Yeah. And
What do you do with
it
that?
it could have saved her life too,
And
and
it has.
yeah. And I saw something recently online that said that there's a lot of science to support that it takes 13 minutes to change someone's life. And it was talking about interactions with people that just 13 minutes could change or save someone's life if you take that time to talk to them, if you take that time to connect with them. And I thought that was really powerful. And I was talking to someone the other day, and they said that the average traffic stop is probably around 13 minutes,
Yeah,
give or take, And so they're like, does everybody have that ability to take 13 minutes to have a conversation with someone, to connect with them, to potentially, help change their situation or even just to make their day a little bit better?
sure. Well, I think that's the legacy that I'm hopeful to leave behind at this department is take the extra time. We have nothing but time unless there's something exigent that comes up, then take the time. You can listen to people all day long, but I think unless you truly hear what
Mm.
they're saying and make them feel a part of the conversation, you're not going to make a difference. But if you truly hear what they're saying, and then I think you can make the community, a much better place. And I think that once you have the community's support behind you, and they have faith and trust in what it is that you do in our small community, it makes all the difference in the world. And I really do believe that if you lead by example, I mean, attitude reflects leadership, quite honestly. And if I go out into the community and I have a very positive attitude, and I'm working with the community and I'm helping people to move on to the next step, or to feel that they are appreciated or listened to, make them a part of what it is that we do day in and day out, you gain so much support, and it makes the job so much better.
Yeah. One of the things that you said to me offline, and I wanted to bring this up because I thought it was a really powerful statement. I was hoping that you could dive into it a little bit deeper in what you meant by it. But you said that true leadership starts with wellness. What does that mean to you?
Well, when I say true leadership starts, you know, with with wellness, I mean, I think that it goes beyond policy. It goes beyond just saying I have a wellness program. You can say those things, but what are you actually doing? You can't just talk about it.
Mhm.
You have to do it, and you have to be a reason that officers on your watch survive, and that they have a long lasting career, and it makes a difference for them. So that's where that comes from when I'm trying to convey that anybody can lead people. Okay, anybody can tell people what to do, but it doesn't make you a leader. You have to lead by example. You have to be out front, and you have to show them. And sometimes showing them means leading by example. And the one thing I've learned over the course of my life is that I won't ask my officers to do anything that I haven't already done, and I'm already willing to do it again. So and that goes along with wellness.
Yeah. What were some of the things that you did that, you said lead by example, some of the things that you've already done? Because I know that when you started your career, the
Right.
conversation was much different than it is now about, wellness. And you had told me that, you had personally found a foundation of wellness that has worked for you. What were some of the things that have helped you along the way?
Well, you really, hit a nail on the head there. Back when we started in this profession, wellness just wasn't a conversation, that long ago. A lot of times you were just instructed, to kind of suck it up and drive on, quite honestly. And that's an old military term, but that's just what you did. You might talk about things a little bit, but you learn how to compartmentalize things and store that away. And over the course of the most of my career, officer wellness really wasn't a topic. And I think that that's where what we see today is the stigma that exists is that officers, whether they're young or old, they're afraid to talk about it. Um, they're afraid that they could lose their jobs. They're afraid that they would not be able to carry firearms. They're just afraid to go. And it's almost an embarrassment, I think, for many of them to say, well, I went and I talked with a counselor today because that incident that happened last week was just very traumatizing. Um, but you have to embrace it. I really think. But that has to start again. It goes right back to it has to start with leadership. And I go back and I talk about the different things because when I arrived at this agency 18 years ago, I didn't. There wasn't a wellness program. So what it was it took a few years to understand that and attending different trainings and talking about below 100 and those types of things that can help, you know, create a long career and wellness with each of your officers. So some of the things that I really decided to do was to focus on family because, you know, family really is a foundation for law enforcement officers. And it is extremely important because quite often what we experience out on the job, we often take home with you. And that's unfortunate. But we know that it happens. And I think that we have to acknowledge that it happens. And that's where you start talking about, you know, secondary traumas because your family then experiences many of the same things that you went through. But until you recognize it and you acknowledge it, you know, it won't make a difference until you can do that. So that, again, family being the foundation, it was very important to me. I work towards ensuring that the officers have days off together. And if there are family members that work for my agency, which I do have a husband and wife that works here, one is an SRO and the other one is a canine officer for me. Um, so I strive to try to find a way that they can have days off together so that allows them to be a family and spend time with their family because family time is so important and scheduling events for our team is so important along with then trying to promote eating healthy getting enough sleep sleep deprivation is horrible especially in a shift you know the shift works that we have in this profession and in addition to that I've encouraged them through fitness goals. I was able to go to our council and pitched them our officer wellness program and what I would like to do with that. And overwhelmingly, they supported getting fitness cards for each of the officers to go. The department paid for that, which sometimes is unheard of in smaller agencies. But when you sell it to them, that the long-term goal and benefits is to create better officers and better officers, healthy officers make for a healthy community. And so we also do Christmas parties, and it includes everybody. My wife and I take the opportunity, and bless her, she is an absolute saint. She absolutely helps out. She puts the packages together, and we try to keep it family based. We try to create whether it's gift certificates to go out to dinner for your significant other and the officer. It may be a movie night type thing. So we put these little packages together just to let them know we appreciate what you do. We go through a lot of tough things, but we appreciate you, and this is our way of showing you. Um, Even recently, I've had some officers who have really stepped up to the plate, and it was very important. So we took the opportunity, and I just made sure that I got them a weekend getaway. You know, husband, wife, go away, have fun. I'll take the road from here. I'll take those on call shifts if I need to, and we'll cover things. We'll get it done. But it's important because again, if they have a healthy mind and body, then they bring that back. They have a positive mental attitude about coming back to work, and they're just more productive and they're healthier people all the way around.
Yeah. You know what's really interesting? When you were talking about stigma and you were like, people are afraid to say, hey, I went and talked to a counselor because that event or that incident was really traumatic and it impacted me. When you said that line, I was like, that is so normal. Like when you said that, I was like, okay, like great. Like that sounds so healthy and so normal. And so it's really interesting to me because I think that you would agree with that. I think a lot of people who would listen to this agree that if someone said, hey, that domestic violence or that car crash or that whatever, you were seeing, that impacted me. And so I have to go talk to somebody. It's not
Absolutely.
it's not weird. It's not weak. It's not, and so I find it to be really interesting that there is still this stigma when we can all recognize that that is a normal reaction to something that is really hard and really not normal. People aren't meant to see those types of things, especially on a consistent basis. And so, um, my hope is that through having these conversations, and saying these things out loud and then recognizing that that is not weak or weird or woo woo. It's totally
Right.
normal that
Right.
hopefully, that perception will start to shift over time.
I really think that it will. But again, I think it really goes back to leadership. And for so many years, I think it was just considered almost taboo to even talk about those things. And I went through some of my own traumas over the course of my career, from officer suicides to friendships where I have lost friends to suicide, fellow officers that I have lost to suicide, even just involved in some of my own traumas, responding to some of those first fatal crashes. That they're scenes that you can't unsee it.
Yeah.
Um, and so leading, I think, by example and showing them, I think that sometimes it's okay for your agency administrator, your chief of police to be a little bit vulnerable at times. And I think let your officers know how passionate you are about wellness. And you're so passionate about it that you're willing to take care of yourself and show them how important that is. It's very important. And at times, I get emotional about it at times, because it's important. And I discuss these things at a CIT training that I teach, and that's critical incident training. But it's some younger officers, it's some seasoned officers, but they've never had the opportunity to address those things. And I share with them the fact that I have myself gone to counseling and talk with counselors. I think it's important to acknowledge that.
Mm.
If we don't acknowledge it, then you're saying it didn't happen. And I think there are many officers out there that have done just what we talked about a little bit earlier, and that's compartmentalizing it and never dealing with it. I myself, it took probably better than 20 years before I was willing to acknowledge some of the things over the years. But I'm a better person for it. I think I'm a better administrator for it, and it helps me to continue to thrive and develop the wellness program here that I hope sticks around for many years after I'm gone.
Yeah. Well, and I think that because I'm guilty of that too. I think anyone who's listening is guilty of like maybe not wanting to admit when you're struggling or shoving things down and not dealing with it. And, the hope is that we learn from some of those things and we do better in the future. But I think we can all relate to at some point in our life, maybe, not doing the best job of handling some of the things that we've gone through. What I found is that when I when I pretend like something didn't happen or I don't acknowledge it, I feel, and I don't know if you can relate to this, but I feel like I become completely unrelatable and then I isolate other people. Because if someone's looking to you as a leader and you are saying, well, nothing bothers me, I care about you and like you should care about your own wellness, but nothing bothers me. I don't need it. Then, now people are like, well, I can't relate to that person because like it's bothering me. And now I feel like I can't speak up because I feel like now I'm being isolated, or maybe I am the quote unquote like broken one. Maybe no one else is being impacted except for me. And then there's this like downward spiral that starts to happen when people feel isolated and they feel alone, like they're the only ones, who are bothered or impacted by certain things. And so I have done that in my life before where I've isolated people, or I tried to put on a front that made me seem like I was impenetrable. And I think it not only was a detriment to me, but it was a detriment to the people around me as well.
I think that's quite often the alpha personality that exists in many of us, is that we don't like to show people that we too can also be vulnerable. Um, and that's where I think we really have to work towards showing the public that we're humans before we are law enforcement officers or other first responders. I think it's important to let them know that sometimes the weight of the badge is pretty doggone heavy. Um, but until we can acknowledge that these things do happen, it's okay to not be okay. Um, but if you don't create that culture within your agency, then I think that we're doing a huge disservice. And I know that there are a lot of agencies that may not have wellness programs, and I'm always going to do the best we can because it's an unfortunate part being out where we are. We're so rural where we are. I mean, we are the farthest northwest law enforcement jurisdiction in the state of Ohio. We are like half a mile from Michigan and 11 miles from the state of Indiana. And we don't have peer support groups that are immediately close to us. We don't have law enforcement clinicians that are trained to talk with us. So we really have to travel and you have to find those resources. So I continue to try, at least in the next couple of years that I have before retirement, I'm really going to try to do the best I can to work towards finding those resources and making them available, not just to me, but to the entire county and adjacent counties. I think it's just that important that we embrace it and let them know that those resources are out there.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of the things that you said, and I always try to remind everyone who's listening, because we do have a lot of leaders who listen to this who maybe are in infancy stages or are dealing with some of the things that you just mentioned of lack of resources, whether that's, funding or, like you said, culturally competent providers. But some of the things that you said don't take a lot of money. They take time and effort. You talked about, allowing people to take some time off to spend with their family, putting together little Christmas packages, or holiday packages for people to like, go and have a movie night or, like those things that build relationships that allow each employee to feel like they are a valued member of the team, that isn't a huge expense. Obviously, there's a lot of things that I'm sure you would like to do and add over time, but I think that sometimes just starting somewhere and starting small, that compounds over time. That's that ripple effect that happens. And so I think some people kind of say, well, we're too small, so we can't do anything. But I think wellness is so multifaceted that even just giving someone a day off or, a little staycation with their spouse to reset, I think is wellness. And I think we can start to think outside the box a little bit and to try to define what wellness looks like within each organization.
No, I would agree, and I think sometimes even just the smallest or the simplest things can make a huge difference. It can make a huge impact when your officers are willing to go to social media and say, "Hey, this is what my chief did, or this is what my administration did for me. It's working.
Hmm.
It's working. It's a work in progress." I think that the moment that we stop placing any focus or emphasis on wellness, allowing our officers to be the best version of themselves, I think as administration, I think that we have failed them. And I don't want any of my colleagues to think that I'm not saying they're not doing their part, because everybody does things a little bit differently, and I'm doing me. And it's just something that I learned early on when I was in the military as a non-commissioned officer. You take care of your people, and you had to know your people. You had to know what their expenses were. You had to know their wife. You knew their children. You knew what their likes and their dislikes are. You knew what drove them. You knew what brought them down. And I do the same thing here. It's important to do that. And in a small agency like ours, it's not difficult to do that. It's just time and effort. And again, like you said, those little small subtle things, sometimes it's enough.
Hmm.
And it's very rewarding to see when your officers are productive and they want to come to work as opposed to dreading going to work. I don't ever want that, so I encourage that feedback, and I try to play off that and try to continue to build the program here to the best of my ability.
Yeah. Yeah, I've had so many conversations where people talk about some of the biggest stresses being within the walls of the organization and how important it is to create culture, and
Mm.
how that impacts wellness. And I've had a few conversations where people said that they would, to your point of dreading coming in, that they would pull over to the side of the road and throw up because they didn't want to go to work.
Sure.
Like it was so bad that they didn't want to go to work, that they were physically getting sick. And I think that there's a lot of things that you can't control. You can't control the types of calls you get or maybe the people you encounter out on the streets, but you can control the culture and the environment that you create within your organization. Um, One of the things that you told me that you guys did, and I want to make sure I bring this up because you have talked about this a few times in different ways, but the importance of family, the importance of, supporting not just the officer, but also the family. And you talked about a retreat that
Mm.
that you went on or that you sent your officers on. Can you talk a little bit about this retreat and why it was so impactful for you?
Yeah. What an amazing group of people. There are so many times that you just don't know the resources that are out there. I happen to I happen to stumble across um, a flyer, and it was with First Responders Bridge, and this group was started by a gentleman who was a retired officer in the state of Ohio who obviously endured many of his own traumas, and he wanted to make a difference. And uh, this gentleman goes out and they have sponsors that come in and pay for everything. It's a weekend retreat. Some of it has some faith-based material in it, but it's at absolutely no cost to law enforcement officers or first responders, and they highly encourage taking your spouses or your significant others with you. Um, they put you up in a hotel, they pay for your meals, and you have nonstop seminars where you can sit in, you can talk about law enforcement clinicians, you can talk about some of the signs and symptoms. Quite often, sometimes our spouses that aren't in the profession, they don't see what those signs and symptoms are. But once they attended this particular event, many of them, it uncovered so many things that they didn't even realize that were bothering them. But I think on the other end of that, their spouses now had a better understanding why does my spouse come home and he or she is upset or ticked off and just mad at everybody or just grumpy and slamming the doors or whatever that might look like, however they vent. But this here really helps to open your eyes. There was a gentleman that went to this retreat, and he had been in the profession probably almost as long as I have. And when he finished the retreat, he said, in all these years, I didn't realize how messed up I was. So his significant other didn't realize it either, and it was just because we didn't recognize the signs and symptoms. We continue to compartmentalize that, but this is such an amazing event, and it costs nothing. I personally attended this first for my agency, and since then I have encouraged, more so mandated, that each of them go, because I think that it's important to do that. I pay them to go to the course, to attend this retreat. I consider it training. It's training your body and your mind, and it helps to bring the family together. So it's another family opportunity to help build that foundation and allow each of you to better communicate between the two of you, husband and wife, or whatever that picture looks like. I think it's important to do that, and this is such an amazing program that was started by Mick Yinger. What a wonderful guy, him and his family. And there are so many wonderful people that get involved with this program. I can't even tell you all the different names and people, but there are so many people that benefit this and support this. And the fact that it doesn't cost anything
Yeah.
other than getting there, you really can't beat it. I think it's worth its weight in gold. It helped me.
Thank you for sharing. And I loved that you said that wellness is training.
It is.
My hope is that that's how it's viewed in the future. I really think that that is one of the ways that we start to break the stigma. We have like these two silos. You have training and you have wellness. And for some reason, wellness, still is maybe to some people the woo-woo witchcraft, like thing that's out there. But when you start to combine them and you start to have these conversations of saying, hey, this is training your body and your mind to perform at an optimal level. And then when you do that, you're a better employee, you're a better example within the community, you're going to perform better, but you're also going to be better at home. And
Sure.
that's the best case scenario. How can we be the best versions? You said this earlier, trying to encourage people to be the best versions of themselves, not just for the organization, but for your family. And I think sometimes we also forget the importance of supporting the spouses. You've mentioned this a few times, and there's a lot of resources out there that are really focused on the officer for good reason. But I love that you really started to mention the importance of supporting the spouses because they're going through some stuff too.
Sure. Spouses, children,
Yeah,
those secondary traumas affect them just as much. And sometimes, as officers, we have to show our families that we can take care of ourselves. We always take care of everybody else, but sometimes we neglect ourselves. And if we neglect ourselves, how likely is it that you neglect your family?
mhm,
And so I think, again, when you acknowledge that there are traumas that maybe yourself or even your significant other have endured over the course of their lives, and we acknowledge it, we talk about it, and we make it real. You work through these things together. It promotes such a wonderful aspect of wellness. It really is, and I think when we do talk about wellness, I think it is training. Again, I think it's training your mind and your body to be the best version of yourselves. And that really kind of reminds me of I'm not sure if you've ever heard this story about this starfish story, and I'm not sure if you've ever heard of that, but it was I don't even know really where it originated from, but it's about a young boy that's walking along the shore and he picks up starfish and he's throwing them back in the water. And an older gentleman says, "Why are you doing that?" And he goes, "Well, I'm saving them." He goes, "Young man, you're not going to save all of them." He goes, "Nope, but I save one at a time."
mhm. I love that. I've never heard that story before.
Well,
I love
and I
that.
think that's the same thing within our profession. I can't save everybody, but I can save one person at a time and try to give them the attention that they deserve, again, to allow them to be the best version of themselves.
Yeah. And that's 1,000,000% worthwhile to do that. I think sometimes we get deflated by the idea that we recognize that we can't change the world. I think that there's a point in our lives where we understand that, us as a single person, maybe we can't change the world, but we can change someone's world.
We sure can. We can make a difference in somebody's world.
Yeah.
And all it takes is sometimes even minimal effort, and just letting them know that you care about them, and that you understand that there are things that are better for them that might be out there that maybe they don't see themselves.
Yeah.
You know,
My final question for you is for that younger officer, someone who's earlier in their career. What words of wisdom would you share with them? Maybe something you wish you would have known earlier or something that's helped you along the way.
I think as a law enforcement officer, starting so many years ago, not having those words of wisdom that you put out there with your program um, back then, I think we have the opportunity to change a culture. And when newer officers or younger officers come in, or even just new officers into the agency, I think one of the things that I like to tell them is you got to take care of yourself as well as you take care of others. And on top of that, your mind and your body are the most important tools. So you have to maintain them with the same level of commitment that you've given to the badge.
Mm, I love that. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah,
It's important that we change that culture. So, and we have to start when they're young. And I think that as leaders, if we start with that and we get them off on the right foot, you conduct those after action reviews when there are traumatic situations, no matter what that looks like. I think we have the ability to change the stigma. I think we have the ability to encourage these young officers uh, to ask for help, to seek help, or to at least be able to talk about it and allow the administration to point them in the right direction, to make their career long and successful.
yeah. No, I agree, and I really appreciate you coming on here and sharing your words of wisdom and everything that you're doing for your people and your community. So, thank you.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to be on here with you. Um, Huge props and much respect to you and what you're doing. I think we have to continue to raise that awareness, and I appreciate what you do.
Thank you.